The night everything cracked, we weren't fighting. That's what still messes with my head. We were sitting on the couch, half watching a show neither of us cared about. Legs touching, her phone face down on the table like always. Comfortable, familiar, safe, or so I thought. She laughed at something on the screen, leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "I'm really happy lately." Most people would hear that and relax. I didn't. Something about the way she said it felt rehearsed, like a line she'd practiced saying out loud so she could believe it herself. I asked her what made her say that. She shrugged. Just life. You. Everything. That should have been enough. But my chest felt tight in a way I couldn't explain. We'd been together for 4 years. Long enough to read each other without words. Long enough to know when silence meant peace, and when it meant distance. And lately, there had been a lot of quiet. Not the calm kind, the empty kind. She'd started telling stories without details, mentioning people without names, saying work stuff instead of actual events. Small changes, easy to ignore if you didn't want to seem paranoid. I didn't want to be that person, so I swallowed it. A week later, I noticed she'd changed her phone password. She didn't hide it, didn't act secretive. She even unlocked it right in front of me sometimes. That almost made it worse, because it meant she wasn't afraid. People who think they're doing nothing wrong are careless, or confident. One evening, she said she was meeting a coworker for drinks. Someone I'd heard about before. Same name, same vague description. Always just work. I offered to pick her up later. She said no too quickly. "I'll Uber. Don't wait up. Don't wait up. We live together. Why wouldn't I wait?" She came home late. Not drunk, not messy, just energized, like someone who'd been charged instead of tired. She kissed me, went straight to the shower, and started humming. That sound stayed with me all night, because she hadn't hummed like that with me in months. The next morning, she was affectionate, extra affectionate, making coffee, asking about my day before it even started. Felt like compensation. I didn't confront her. I didn't check her phone. I didn't ask questions. Instead, I paid attention. I noticed how she stopped complaining about work, even though it used to stress her out constantly. How she started dressing differently on days she stayed late. How she'd smile at messages and then lock her phone immediately after. One afternoon, I came home early. Her laptop was open on the table, not angled away, not hidden, just there. A message notification popped up. Not explicit, not romantic, just a sentence that punched the air out of my lungs. "I miss how easy it is with you. No name, no context, just enough." I closed the laptop and sat down. I remember thinking, don't overreact. Don't jump to conclusions. That's what people tell you to do when they don't want to face what they already know. That night, I asked her a simple question. "Are you still in this with me?" She looked surprised, then confused, then slightly annoyed. "Why would you ask that?" I told her I felt distance, that something felt off. She sighed and said I was overthinking again. Again. That word landed harder than she realized, because it meant this wasn't the first time she'd dismissed my instincts. She reassured me, hugged me, told me she loved me, and I wanted to believe her so badly that I almost did. Almost. But love doesn't make you feel like you're slowly being replaced in your own life. Love doesn't turn clarity into doubt. That night, lying next to her, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't afraid she'd already chosen someone else. I was afraid she was still deciding, and keeping me around as the safe option while she figured it out. After that night, sleep became impossible. Not because I was scared of what I'd find, but because my mind wouldn't stop replaying everything I'd ignored. Every "you're overthinking," every half answer, every time I'd chosen peace over clarity. I stopped asking questions out loud. Instead, I observed. She started living on a different schedule than mine, staying late, leaving early, claiming exhaustion but somehow always having energy for her phone. Conversations became efficient, like we were roommates coordinating logistics instead of partners sharing a life. I tested small things. I stopped initiating affection. She noticed but didn't ask why. That hurt more than rejection. If she still needed me emotionally, she would have asked. A few days later, she mentioned his name casually, just once. Slipped into a story about work like it was nothing. I froze internally. This was the first time she'd attached a real person to the fog she'd been living in. I asked how long they'd been working closely. She answered too quickly. Not that long. Another lie, or at least a minimized truth. That night, I did something I'd promised myself I'd never do. I checked her phone. Not secretly. She was in the shower. Her phone buzzed. I picked it up, fully expecting to put it back untouched. But the screen lit up. His name. A message preview. Today felt different. I think we're getting closer. My hands went cold. I didn't scroll. I didn't read more. I didn't need to. That single sentence confirmed everything my gut had been screaming. This wasn't emotional distance. This was emotional transfer. She was giving someone else the parts of herself she used to give me. Curiosity, excitement, vulnerability. When she came out of the shower, I put the phone back exactly where it was. She smiled at me like nothing had happened. I wondered how long she'd been practicing that smile. The next few days were surreal. She planned things with me, dinner, a movie, a weekend idea, while actively nurturing something with him. I realized then that betrayal doesn't always come with cruelty. Sometimes it comes with comfort. You're kept warm while being replaced. I confronted her gently. I told her I felt like she was emotionally somewhere else. She denied it immediately, said she was just stressed, said work was intense, said I was projecting. Then she said something that still echoes in my head. You're imagining competition that doesn't exist. Competition. That word made my stomach turn, because it meant she'd already framed this as a comparison, even if she refused to admit it. I asked her directly if there was someone else. She didn't answer right away. She laughed nervously and said, "Why are you doing this?" That hesitation said more than any confession could. That night, I slept on the couch. She didn't stop me. She didn't ask me to come back to bed. The next morning, she acted normal. Asked if I wanted coffee, as if distance was something we'd both silently agreed on. That's when I realized something deeply unsettling. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of confronting herself, because confronting me would have forced a choice she wasn't ready to make. So she stayed in the middle with me as the safety net. I started preparing myself mentally, not to catch her, but to leave with clarity. Because the worst thing you can do in a situation like that is beg for someone who's already walking away quietly. By the end of that week, I knew the truth. Not because she admitted it, but because she stopped trying to convince me otherwise. The pretending didn't end with a confession. It ended with exhaustion. Meaning, I was tired of reading between lines, tired of noticing what she avoided, tired of feeling like a guest in my own relationship. So I stopped playing along. One evening, she came home late again. Same routine. Shoes off quietly, phone in hand. That careful softness people use when they don't want to be questioned. I didn't ask where she'd been. That surprised her. She hovered near the kitchen, pretending to look for something, clearly waiting for me to say anything. I didn't. Finally, she asked, "Are you okay?" I looked at her and said, "I don't think you are." Her face changed. Not guilt, not anger, fear. Because fear shows up when someone realizes they're about to lose control of the narrative. She sat down across from me and started talking fast. About stress, about work, about how things had been weird lately, about how she felt lost. I let her talk. Then I asked one question. "Do you talk to him about this?" Silence. Not denial. Silence. That was the moment I knew everything. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She just looked tired, like someone who'd been carrying two lives and was finally struggling to balance both. She admitted it wasn't physical, yet she said she didn't mean for it to happen, that it just felt easy, that he listened, that she felt seen again. as if I'd stopped seeing her. I asked her why she didn't talk to me instead. She said she didn't want to hurt me. That sentence almost made me laugh, because she'd been hurting me for weeks, just quietly. I asked if she was going to choose. She said she didn't know, and that was my answer. I told her I wasn't going to compete for a place I already held. I told her I wouldn't stay in a relationship where honesty was optional and comfort mattered more than respect. She asked for time while still talking to him. I said no. That was the first time in weeks she actually reacted. She cried then, not because she lost me, but because she lost the option of keeping both. I packed a bag that night. She watched from the doorway, saying nothing. Didn't stop me, didn't follow me, didn't fight. And that told me everything I needed to know. Over the next few days, she messaged me like nothing had happened, checking in, sending memories, saying she missed me. I didn't respond, not out of anger, out of clarity. Because once someone shows you they're willing to emotionally replace you while keeping you comfortable, you can't unsee it. Weeks later, I heard through a mutual friend that she was openly seeing him. No secrecy anymore. No confusión. Just confirmation. And strangely, I felt relief, because the version of her I loved wouldn't have done what she did. The person she became was someone I didn't recognize. Walking away didn't feel like strength at first. Felt like loss. But slowly, the quiet stopped hurting. I slept better, thought clearer, trusted myself again. And I learned something I wish I'd known earlier. If someone makes you feel like you're slowly being replaced, believe that feeling. Love doesn't keep you guessing where you stand. If this story hit a nerve, you're not alone. Quiet betrayals like this happen more than people admit. Subscribe for more intense, real relationship and family stories that expose the moments people usually hide until it's too late. I didn't realize my family had already chosen sides until I stopped getting invited to things. At first, it was small. A dinner I wouldn't enjoy anyway. A birthday they said was last minute. A holiday plan that somehow slipped everyone's mind to mention. I told myself I was overthinking. That's what you do when the people hurting you are the same people who raised you. The truth came out on a random Tuesday in the most casual way possible. My sister called me angry, not at me, at them. She asked why I wasn't coming to the family meeting. I laughed and said, "What family meeting?" Silence. Then she said, "You seriously don't know?" That's when my stomach dropped. Apparently, our parents had been talking, planning, deciding things that directly affected me, my place in the family business, future support, even where holidays would be spent. Without me, I asked her why. She hesitated. Then she said, "They think you're difficult. Difficult. Because I didn't blindly agree with everything. Because I asked questions. Because I refused to play along when things felt unfair." She told me our parents felt closer to my brother now. That he was more reliable, more grateful, easier. I asked when this started. She said, "A long time ago." Suddenly, everything made sense. Why my calls went unanswered. Why decisions were already made when I spoke up. Why I always felt like I was catching up to conversations I was supposed to be part of. That night, I confronted my parents. I didn't yell. I asked one simple question. "Why didn't you tell me?" My father said they didn't want conflict. My mother said they assumed I wouldn't understand. I asked if they'd already chosen. They didn't deny it. They said they were doing what was best for the family. I asked where I fit into that. My mother said, "You'll always be our child, but not our priority, not our choice, not someone worth consulting." I left that house feeling like I'd just been quietly written out of my own life. And the worst part, they acted like nothing had changed, like I was supposed to just accept it, like betrayal doesn't count if it's done politely. That was the moment I realized something painful. You don't always lose people in a fight. Sometimes you lose them in a room you were never invited into. After that night, everything felt off, like I was walking through my own life with a delayed echo. I still got the occasional "how are you" text, Still got invited to big holidays, but only after plans were already set. Still heard, "We love you," said casually, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. But love without consideration doesn't feel like love. It feels like obligation. I started noticing patterns I'd ignored my entire life. How my brother's mistakes were always explained away. Stress, pressure, bad timing. How my smallest pushback was labeled attitude. How being independent somehow turned into being ungrateful in their eyes. I replayed old arguments in my head and realized something brutal. I wasn't difficult. I was inconvenient. I asked why things were the way they were. I didn't accept because we said so as an answer once I became an adult. I didn't play the role they quietly assigned me. And families don't punish rebellion loudly. They punish it quietly, by excluding you, by deciding without you, by slowly shifting emotional investment elsewhere until you barely recognize your place anymore. A week later, I found out how deep it went. My aunt called me, confused. She asked why I wasn't moving back closer to home since everything was settled. I asked her what she meant. She said my parents told everyone I'd decided to distance myself, that I wanted space, that I was focusing on my own life now. It was framed like a choice, like I'd stepped away voluntarily. I hadn't. They'd rewritten the story, not to hurt me, but to make themselves comfortable. So they didn't have to explain my absence. So they didn't have to admit they'd pushed me out. So they could keep the peace without facing the cost. I confronted them again. This time, it didn't stay calm. I asked why they told people I chose distance when they never included me in the first place. My father said they were simplifying things. My mother said it sounded better. That was the moment something cracked inside me. Because betrayal hurts, but being erased politely hurts more. I asked if they planned to tell me when decisions affected my future. They said they would try. I asked if they understood why I was upset. My mother said, "We didn't think you'd take it this hard." That sentence stayed with me. Not "we're sorry," not "we messed up," just surprised that I was reacting at all. As if my role was to absorb things quietly. I stopped initiating contact after that. Not out of spite, out of exhaustion. And something strange happened. No one noticed. Days passed, then weeks. No calls asking if I was okay. No check-ins. No concern. Just silence, the kind that confirms everything you were afraid to believe. I started questioning myself. Was I too sensitive? Was I reading into things? Was I expecting too much from family? Then my sister visited me. She looked uncomfortable the entire time. Finally, she said it. "They think you're pulling away on purpose." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was inevitable. I asked if they tried to reach out. She said, "They don't want to push you." Push me into what? Being included? Being consulted? Being treated like I mattered? That's when I realized something devastating. They preferred a version of me that stayed quiet and distant because it required no effort. I wasn't being missed. I was being managed. And the longer I stayed silent, the easier it became for them to pretend everything was fine. But inside me, something was shifting. I stopped waiting for calls, stopped explaining myself, stopped hoping they'd suddenly realize what they were losing. Because the hardest truth wasn't that my family chose someone else. It was that they'd done it so calmly, so gently, that they expected me to accept it without protest. The breaking point didn't come with a fight. It came with paperwork. A thick envelope showed up at my door one afternoon, forwarded from my parents' address. Inside were documents related to the family business, changes to ownership, responsibilities, future planning. My name wasn't anywhere in it. Not as a stakeholder, not as a consultant, not even as someone to be informed. I was listed once as not involved. Seeing it in writing felt worse than any argument we'd ever had. This wasn't emotional anymore. It was official. I called my parents and asked why no one thought to tell me. My father said they assumed I already knew. I asked how. He said, "We thought it was obvious. Obvious. That I no longer mattered." My mother tried to soften it. She said they didn't want to burden me, that my brother was better suited, that this didn't change how they felt about me. But it changed everything. Because love that excludes you from your own future isn't love. It's control. I told them I needed distance. Real distance. Not the fake kind they'd been telling people about. They panicked. Suddenly, they wanted to talk. Suddenly, they wanted to explain. Suddenly, they were afraid I was overreacting. That irony almost broke me. They were scared of losing me only when I stopped trying to stay. I spent weeks replaying my childhood in my head. Every time I was told to be patient. Every time I was told I was too much. Every time I swallowed frustration to keep the peace. I realized I'd been training myself for years to accept less. Less attention, less say, less care. And when I finally asked for equal footing, they'd chosen the path of least resistance instead. My brother never asked for more. He fit. I didn't. So they adjusted the family around him and quietly pushed me to the edges. I wrote them a message I rewrote 100 times. I didn't accuse. I didn't insult. I didn't beg. I explained how being excluded had affected me. How decisions made without me felt like rejection. How rewriting the story to make it seem like my choice was deeply hurtful. I told them I loved them, but I couldn't keep showing up where I wasn't wanted. My father replied with logistics. My mother replied with guilt. Neither replied with accountability. That was my answer. I stopped trying to explain myself after that. I didn't cut them off dramatically. I didn't announce anything. I just stopped chasing connection that wasn't being offered freely. Months passed. The silence felt heavy at first, then peaceful. I built routines that didn't revolve around waiting for approval. I surrounded myself with people who asked my opinion before making plans. People who noticed when I was quiet. People who didn't need me to shrink to stay. One day, my mother called, crying. She said the family felt different without me, that holidays felt incomplete, that she didn't understand how things had gone this far. I told her the truth. They hadn't gone far suddenly. They'd gone far slowly, one exclusion at a time. I told her I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done pretending things were okay when they weren't. She asked if things could ever go back to normal. I said no, because normal was what hurt me. We still talk now, but on my terms. I no longer fight to be included. I no longer explain why something hurts. I no longer accept polite erasure as love. Losing your place in your family feels like losing your foundation. But sometimes, it's the only way to realize you were standing on ground that was never solid to begin with. And if this story felt uncomfortably familiar, you're not alone. A lot of people are quietly erased by the people who claim to love them most. If you want more intense, real Reddit-style family and relationship stories that don't sugarcoat betrayal, make sure you subscribe. These stories get deeper, messier, and more honest from here. The first sign wasn't a fight. It was how calm everyone became around me. No tensión, no arguments. Just this strange politeness that felt rehearsed, like I'd walked into a room where a conversation had already ended. I noticed it at a family dinner. Everyone was there. My parents, my cousin, my uncle, laughing, talking over each other, sharing stories. The moment I sat down, the energy dipped just a little. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to feel. I told myself I was imagining it. I always did that. When you grow up being the strong one, you're expected to absorb discomfort quietly. Halfway through dinner, my uncle mentioned a plan. A big one. Something that directly affected me. I looked around the table, confused, and asked, "Wait, when was this decided?" There was a pause. Not a shocked pause. An ocean pause. My mother answered quickly, "We thought you knew." I didn't, and the way everyone avoided my eyes told me that wasn't a mistake. They'd discussed it already, agreed on it already, moved forward already, just without me. I tried to stay calm. I asked questions, reasonable ones. The answers were vague. "We'll explain later. It's complicated." It just made sense. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the dinner in my head, noticing all the small things I'd ignored before. How conversations stopped when I entered a room. How plans were referenced instead of discussed. How people spoke around me instead of to me. It wasn't hostility. It was worse. It was quiet exclusion. Over the next few weeks, the pattern became impossible to ignore. I'd hear about decisions after they were made. I'd find out about gatherings once they were already over. I'd be told things were last minute that clearly weren't. I confronted my mother gently. I asked if something was wrong. She smiled and said, "Why would anything be wrong?" That answer felt rehearsed. A few days later, my cousin slipped up. We were talking casually when she mentioned something that made no sense timeline-wise. I asked her when it happened. She froze, then said, "Oh, I assumed you knew." There it was again. That phrase pressed her. She got uncomfortable and finally said, "They didn't want to stress you. Stress me. By excluding me?" That's when the truth started to form in my mind. Slow and heavy. They weren't protecting me. They were managing me, keeping me informed just enough to avoid confrontation, but never enough to let me influence anything. I started thinking back years. Every time I was told I was too emotional. Every time my concerns were labeled overthinking. Every time I was praised for being independent, but punished for needing inclusion. I realized something terrifying. This hadn't started recently. This had been building quietly for years. One night, I overheard a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. My father was speaking softly, deliberately. "She doesn't need to know yet. No, it'll just cause drama. We'll tell her once it's done." Me. I stood there frozen, my chest tight, listening to my own life being discussed like a logistical problem. When he saw me, his face changed. Not guilt, calculation. He asked how long I'd been standing there. I said long enough. That's when the excuses came. They said they were trying to keep peace, that I took things too personally, that involving me made everything harder. Harder, because I asked why, because I wanted clarity, because I refused to smile and accept things that felt wrong. That night, I cried, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, because something inside me finally accepted a truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't being misunderstood. I was being slowly written out. After that night, I stopped giving them the benefit of the doubt. Once you see exclusion clearly, you can't unsee it. I started paying attention, not emotionally, but methodically. I listened to what was said, what wasn't said, and who controlled the narrative in every room. And what I realized was worse than betrayal. It was intention. They weren't forgetting to include me. They were actively deciding when I deserved to know things. Information became currency. I'd find out about decisions only after they were finalized. When I asked questions, I was told it was too late to change anything anyway. When I expressed discomfort, I was accused of creating unnecessary tension. I became the problem simply for reacting. One afternoon, I tested something. There was an upcoming family gathering I'd heard rumors about. Nothing confirmed. I didn't ask. I didn't remind. I didn't follow up. The day came and went. No one contacted me. That was the moment it fully clicked. If I didn't fight to stay included, I disappeared. Later that evening, I saw photos online. Everyone smiling. Everyone together. Captions about family time and love. I wasn't mentioned. Not tagged. Not referenced. Not missed. When I asked my mother about it the next day, she sounded genuinely confused. "Oh, we thought you were busy." Busy doing what? Waiting to be invited? I asked her why no one had reached out. She said, "We didn't want to bother you." That phrase again, bother you, as if inclusion was an inconvenience. That conversation escalated into something uglier. She finally admitted that things were easier when I wasn't involved, that I asked too many questions, that I made people uncomfortable by wanting clarity. I asked her if wanting honesty from my own family was unreasonable. She didn't answer. Instead, she said something that hurt more than anything else. You've always been different. Different, not wrong, not misunderstood, just inconveniently aware. That's when I understood my role. I wasn't the scapegoat. I was the disruptor. I noticed inconsistencies. I remembered conversations. I questioned decisions that benefited some people more than others. And families like mine don't reward that. They neutralize it, quietly, by controlling access, by labeling reactions as drama, by painting exclusion as protection. I talked to my sibling next. I thought maybe they'd understand. They didn't. They told me to let it go, to stop taking things personally, to accept that not everything involved me. I asked them one simple question. If it doesn't involve me, why does it affect my life? They had no answer, just silence. And that silence said everything. I realized then that they weren't confused. They were complicit. They benefited from my absence. Less conflict, less resistance, more control. I wasn't excluded because I was weak. I was excluded because I was inconveniently honest. The hardest part wasn't losing my place. It was realizing I never truly had one. I'd been tolerated, not included, consulted, not considered, loved, but only within limits that made others comfortable. I stopped defending myself after that, stopped explaining, stopped clarifying, stopped asking to be seen, because you can't force people to value your presence when they've already decided it's optional. And somewhere in that silence, something shifted. The pain turned into clarity. The confusion turned into resolve. I didn't announce my decision. I didn't warn anyone. I just stopped participating. No reminders, no follow-ups, no emotional check-ins disguised as just asking. I let the silence do the work for me. First, nothing changed. Weeks passed, and no one noticed. That hurt, but it also confirmed everything I already knew. Then small things started happening. Plans got messy. Decisions stalled. Arguments popped up where I used to quietly smooth things over. I'd been doing more emotional labor than I realized. I was the translator, the buffer, the one who remembered details and timelines and promises. Without me, the cracks showed. My mother called one afternoon, irritated. She asked why I hadn't responded to a message about a decision that directly affected me. I asked her calmly, when was I included before the decision was made? She paused, then said, that's not the point. That told me everything. They didn't miss me. They missed my compliance. I told her I was tired of being informed after the fact. Tired of being expected to adapt to plans I had no voice in. She said I was being dramatic. I didn't argue. I just said, then make decisions without me completely. And I meant it. That's when panic crept in. Because what they wanted wasn't my absence. It was my availability without influence. Over the next month, they tried different tactics. Guilt, concern, sudden affection. My father sent messages asking if I was okay. My siblings suggested we reset and move forward. My mother cried on the phone, saying she didn't recognize me anymore. I listened, and for the first time, I didn't absorb the blame. I realized something important. They were uncomfortable. Not because they'd hurt me, but because I'd stopped making it easy for them to ignore it. Eventually, the truth came out. Not in one dramatic confession, but in fragments. My mother admitted they worried I challenged decisions. My father admitted I complicated things. My sibling admitted it was easier when I wasn't involved. There it was, the honesty I'd been asking for all along. And hearing it hurt, but it also freed me, because now I knew the rules. I wasn't excluded because I was unlovable. I was excluded because I refused to stay small. That realization changed how I showed up everywhere else in my life. I stopped over-explaining at work, stopped apologizing for asking questions, stopped shrinking myself to preserve peace, and something surprising happened. People started respecting me more. Not everyone stayed. Some relationships faded when I stopped being convenient, but the ones that remained were real. Months later, my family tried one last time. They invited me to a gathering, this time asking my opinion in advance. It felt performative, like a test. I declined, not angrily, not emotionally, just honestly. I told them I wasn't ready to step back into a dynamic where my presence was conditional. Silence followed, then disappointment, then acceptance. We still speak occasionally, but I no longer confuse proximity with belonging. I no longer chase inclusion where my voice is unwelcome. I built a life where I don't have to fight to be heard. And here's the part no one tells you. Walking away doesn't always feel empowering at first. Sometimes it feels lonely. Sometimes it feels like grief. But eventually, it feels like peace. Because losing people who only valued you when you were quiet isn't a loss. It's clarity. If the story felt uncomfortably familiar, you're not broken, you're aware. And if you want more intense, honest stories about family, relationships, and betrayal that people usually stay silent about, subscribe and stay. These stories are made for the ones who were never supposed to notice the truth. I found the folder by accident. It was buried deep in her laptop, inside another folder labeled tax stuff, which already felt strange because she hated anything related to finances. I was only there because my own computer had died and she told me, casually, use mine if you need. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious. I trusted my wife completely. The folder name that caught my eye wasn't dramatic. It was calm, organized, post-separation. My stomach dropped before I even clicked it. Inside were subfolders, budgets, apartment listings, screenshots of text conversations with a lawyer, and a document titled, Things to Say When He Asks. I remember just staring at the screen, waiting for my brain to catch up to what my eyes were seeing. We were still sleeping in the same bed, still having dinner together, still talking about a vacation she said she wanted to take next year. And yet here she was, months ahead of me, planning a life where I didn't exist. I closed the laptop and sat there in silence. My hands were shaking, but my face felt numb. When she came home that night, she kissed my cheek like always, asked about my day, complained about traffic. Everything normal, everything fake. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront her immediately, but instead I waited, because if she was capable of planning this much behind my back, I needed to understand why. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I'd brushed off before. How she'd become emotionally distant but physically present. How she'd ask surface-level questions and never follow up. How she'd reassure me we were fine. Anytime I sensed something was off, she wasn't checked out. She was transitioning. One night, she fell asleep early, her phone buzzing softly on the nightstand. I didn't touch it, but I didn't need to. Her screen lit up with a message preview. Once you're out, things will be easier. Not if, not when. I realized then that she wasn't debating whether to leave. She was just managing the timing. The next morning, she told me she'd be working late. Again, I watched her get ready, humming quietly, choosing her outfit carefully, the way she used to when we first started dating. That hurt more than anything else, because it meant she still cared how she looked, just not for me. I thought back to the last year of our marriage, the fights that never really resolved, the conversations that ended with, let's not ruin the night, the way I'd started carrying more emotional weight just to keep things calm. I thought compromise meant maturity. I didn't realize it was training her to live without resistance. In one of the documents I'd seen, she'd written a line that kept replaying in my head. He'll be hurt, but he'll recover. As if I was a temporary inconvenience. As if our years together were just a rough patch she needed to get through. I started asking myself brutal questions. How long had she been unhappy? How long had she been pretending? How many smiles had I misread as real? That weekend, she suggested we invite friends over. She laughed more than I'd heard in months, told stories, played the perfect partner. Everyone left thinking we were solid. I sat there afterward, surrounded by empty glasses and leftover food, wondering how no one else could see what I now knew, that my marriage wasn't falling apart. It had already ended, I just hadn't been informed yet. And the scariest part wasn't that she wanted to leave. It was that she was so calm about destroying something I was still desperately trying to save. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I decided to see how far she was willing to go while still pretending everything was normal. That decision hurt me more than anything else I've ever done to myself. Over the next 2 weeks, I became invisible inside my own marriage. I watched her carefully, not like a jealous husband, but like someone studying a stranger who happened to know all my habits. She was careful, almost rehearsed. She picked her words. She controlled her tone. She avoided anything that could turn into a real conversation. Whenever I tried to talk about the future, she redirected. Whenever I asked how she was really feeling, she said she was tired. I wasn't her partner anymore. I was a role she hadn't exited yet. One night, I casually asked her if she still saw us growing old together. She paused just for half a second, then smiled and said, "Of course." That pause told me everything. A few days later, I did something I never thought I'd do. I contacted the lawyer whose name I'd seen in her folder. I didn't pretend to be her. I didn't lie. I asked one simple question: whether my wife had already begun separation proceedings. The answer was yes. Not officially filed yet, but prepared. Dates, assets, living arrangements. She had even listed when she planned to tell me. 3 months from now, after her bonus cleared, after securing a new apartment, after emotionally detaching completely, I hung up the phone and sat there for a long time. That's when the betrayal finally shifted into clarity. This wasn't a marriage problem. This was an exit strategy. That night, I packed a bag, not because I was leaving permanently, but because I needed to see her reaction. I told her I was staying with a friend for a few days. I didn't accuse her. I didn't raise my voice. I just said I needed space. Her reaction wasn't panic. It was relief. She tried to hide it, but I saw it. She asked polite questions, said she understood, told me to take my time. No tears, no fear, no fight. That hurt more than anger ever could. 2 days later, I came back unexpectedly. She wasn't alone. Her phone lit up on the couch while she was in the shower. I didn't touch it, I didn't need to. A message preview popped up. "Once he's gone, we can finally be honest." I waited until she came out. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I asked her one question. "How long were you planning to lie to me?" Her face collapsed. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize either. She said she didn't want to hurt me. I laughed, because everything she'd done was designed to protect herself, not me. She admitted she'd emotionally checked out months ago, that she felt trapped, that planning helped her feel safe. I asked why she didn't talk to me. She said she didn't think talking would change anything. That sentence ended our marriage more cleanly than any paperwork ever could. Because if you don't believe your partner is worth an honest conversation, you're already gone. We separated quietly. No screaming matches. No dramatic scenes. Just two people packing memories into boxes, one of us much earlier than the other. The last thing she said to me before moving out was, "I hope you understand someday." I already did. I understood that love doesn't disappear overnight. It disappears while one person is still trying. Months later, my life looks different. Not easier, but honest. I trust my instincts now. I ask harder questions. I don't ignore silence disguised as peace. And I learned a painful truth. Sometimes the deepest betrayal isn't cheating. It's staying while already planning your escape. If the story hit closer than you expected, you're not alone. These quiet betrayals happen more often than people admit. Subscribe for more intense, real Reddit-style relationship and family stories, the kind that expose what people hide until it's too late.